a Seattle Kraken or just generally hockey fan and aspiring medical professional making a difference once again, Jeff Baker weighs in on the leaked Winter Classic logo, and I give you my circled games for the January slate of Kraken games for the upcoming season. That and more on this episode of Locked On Kraken.
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are the Seattle Kraken.
Hey, what do you say, Seattle hockey fans? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you your team every single day. I am Erica L. Ayala, your host of Locked On Kraken. I am a multimedia sports journalist, podcaster, broadcaster, and writer. Most of my stuff for the upcoming hockey season will be with CBS Sports and, of course, right here on Locked On Kraken. I am really excited for today's show. We've got a lot of different topics that I want to talk about. And some of you may remember a story that once again made national news. And no, I am not talking about the Wenbergs and book talk, but we're talking about a Seattle Kraken fan, Nadia Papavisi. Now, she has entered into medical school. Actually, the Vancouver Canucks and the Seattle Kraken made a donation towards her education. And that is because Nadia was at a Seattle Kraken game at Climate Pledge Arena and put up a sign to the equipment manager of the Vancouver Canucks that he should check out what she believed could be a cancerous mole that she noticed during warm-ups. As it turns out, that was absolutely the right call. Again, has made national news. But Nadia has once again made national news. And shout out to Emerald City Hockey, one of the first people that I saw posting her fundraiser. Now, Nadia, again, a medical professional in training, and recently donated a kidney, and has on her Just Giving page, and her social media pages, not only chronicled her journey and how being able to donate a kidney has instructed and given her a different way of thinking about her profession, but she's also now helping raise money. And so I'm going to take you to, again, her Just Giving page. And I love this. This is today, Tuesday, August 8th, she's at 32% of her $10,000 target, and she's raised $3,290. So I don't know, the Seattle Kraken organization, we feel some kind of way about the number 32, but she's raising money for the Northwest Kidney Centers. And she talks here about being, again, a medical professional. She's at the University of Washington School of Medicine in Seattle. And she gives this stat. In the case of kidney disease in the U.S., over 90,000 people are on the waiting list for a transplant. 13 of them die every day. You can have the best doctors, a solidified diagnosis, a treatment plan. But what can you do when there's simply not enough kidneys to go around? And then she goes into that, teeing up why she decided to donate a kidney. And again, you can see Emerald City Hockey, they made a donation. Again, that's one of the ways that this was flagged for me. And so she writes and continues, if you have the means, it would mean the world to me if you could donate to the Northwest Kidney Centers on my behalf. They are a local nonprofit organization with no affiliation to me, but I am sincerely inspired by their work providing dialysis, research, and education to the same patients I may see in the future. Ultimately, I am so grateful whether you donate or not. I have linked my donation page below, which includes an open letter to the stranger who received my kidney. Their transplant was successful, and I sincerely wish them the happiest, healthiest life possible as they move forward. And again, You know here, if you are an everydayer, or especially if you're an OGer, that I do believe in creating community. The Seattle Kraken, I think, does a much better job than most professional sports organizations creating community. And Nadia is a part of our community. So even if all you're doing is sharing like we are here on Locked On Kraken, I hope that you'll consider looking into being a donor. I recently had to change my driver's license from New York, where actually I am right now, to Oklahoma. Some of you, again, know my journey of moving. And I always make sure I am an organ donor. I also make a monetary donation anytime I'm at the Department of Motor Vehicles, because I mean, if I'm being honest, I've seen enough episodes of Grey's Anatomy to know that this is really important, but also taking it outside of just what we consume as entertainment. I have had family members who maybe didn't need transplants or donations, but I should say my father, when he was alive, did need a blood transplant. So donating blood, donating things, donating to causes is extremely important. And I have gotten involved in medical causes that are more near and dear to my family, cancer, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's disease. So I hope that at minimum, talking about this on our episode here today of Locked On Kraken is just a reminder that, again, let's be kind to each other. Let's take care of each other and ourselves. But also that there are ways that we can support people that we've never met if we have the means. And that's if you have the means. And so if you can share this, if you can make a donation, if you are a person of faith and you can send out good messages and prayers and good vibes, I hope you'll do that. And I think it's awesome that we have this connection through Nadia now, who is, again, in this profession, in this field, that is making space in her circle to expand that. And that includes the hockey community. If you check out Nadia on social media, she's also showed where Vancouver Canucks fans and Seattle Kraken fans have donated. And she shared that she is just over the moon that those two hockey organizations, and by extension, us, their community, continue to support her efforts, whether it's medical school or this fundraiser. So it's a feel-good story. I wanted to start with a feel-good story that is, tangentially related to the Seattle Kraken, but that can have a massive impact. Maybe for someone who listens to our podcast, maybe someone who listens to Emerald City Hockey or reads Jeff Baker, who we're going to talk about in the next segment. So this is a feel-good hockey story. I like to share feel-good hockey stories. So again, you can check out Nadia's page. I will link it in the show notes for you, and you can read her letter here. She's been giving updates on her page. And again, you can learn more about the Northwest Kidney Centers. Maybe this is something where you want to volunteer or you want to get more involved directly. The information is all here for you. So thank you for just taking some time out. But coming up next on Locked On Kraken, I've been reading Jeff Baker's mailbag. Me personally, mailbags can be hit or miss for me, but I think they're a great way to interact and engage. And Jeff Baker's been doing a great job with that. And I read those because I think they also give us little tidbits of information of things we've either talked about here on Locked On Kraken or that maybe we should be talking about. And so one of those things that overlaps with Jeff's latest mailbag to Seattle Kraken fans as part of the Seattle Times, what are we thinking about the leaked logo, the leaked Winter Classic logo? And then, of course, I'm going to give you my circled games on the January calendar. And you best believe, that January Winter Classic game is on there. That's all coming up next on Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken is brought to you by AG1. AG1 is a daily foundational nutritional supplement that supports whole body health. And isn't that great? We just talked about Nadia. She's a medical student and talking about health and wellness and why that's important. And now we're talking about AG1. Now, I gave AG1 a try, not only because we were gifted their daily supplement, but because, again, I tell you all the time, I'm on the road. I'm on the road right now, all the time. And it's really difficult sometimes to find the food that suits my body type the best, that I like the best when you're on the road. And I've really been working on focusing on my nutritional intake, eating more fruits, eating more vegetables, eating more organic, but you can't always do that when you're on the road. That's why I love AG1. 8 ounces of water, 1 scoop of their product, and I have over 75 adaptogens, microbiotics, probiotics, all the good stuff that I need. So instead of having to either find all of this on the road or spend a ton of money on supplements, I have one go-to that I take as part of my daily routine every day. As you know, I've talked about my daily routine, and I am good to go. It's really easy to have as part of your daily routine. It helps you build your health and start a solid foundation. And so again, it's 75 high quality ingredients that give me key daily nutrients and support energy, focus, strength, and clarity. So if a comprehensive solution is what you need from your supplemental routine, then try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and the 5 AG1 travel packs. Love those things so much. That will all come with your first purchase when you go to drinkag1.com/NHL network. That's drinkag1.com/NHL network. Go check it out. Thanks again for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily routine. We appreciate you so much here at Locked On Kraken and the Locked On Podcast Network. And speaking of the Locked On Podcast Network, I will be doing my women's hockey spotlight on Friday. And also, speaking of community, let's just send some love to Gil Martin, who does an amazing job, not just for the Locked On Podcast Network, but specifically for Locked On NHL. He's also the host of Locked On Islanders. And again, it's not my necessarily business to tell, but let's just send some good vibes to Gil and his extended family. So make sure after you listen to us, your daily destination right here at Locked On Kraken, that you also have a listen to Locked On NHL. It was Nick, who's one of the hosts of Locked On Predators, along with Ann Kimmel, who has squadcasted with me a lot, as well as Seth from Locked On Minnesota Wild. They had a really interesting poll ranking Western Conference coaches and potential Calder Award winners. And yes, the Seattle Kraken have been mentioned a time or two. So go listen to that episode from last week on the Western Conference Roundup, and maybe we'll talk about it a little bit later, either this week or next week. Now, let's get over to the mailbag. So again, if you don't already, check out Jeff Baker and the amazing work that's happening over at the Seattle Times, the coverage of the Seattle Kraken, and some really interesting nuggets here, including things and topics that we've talked about. One that I really appreciated is a listener, or a reader, I guess, in Jeff's case, asked, who do we think are going to be the top offensive contributors? And there was a question for forwards, but also a question for defenders. And I thought Jeff's answer for defenders was really interesting. The person who asked the question said, anyone outside of Vince Dunn. So we know that we avoided arbitration with Vince Dunn. We've talked about that on the show. You heard me ask Vince Dunn 2 questions. We had that about a week ago, I guess now, a little while ago. So if you're not caught up with Locked On Kraken, check out those other episodes on YouTube. And again, if you subscribe on YouTube, you'll get it, and you hit the notification bell, You will get an update every time we upload, not just a daily episode. We're in our off season, so you get 3 times a week for the next month, but also we put that media availability up. So let me know how you like that. Anyway, so outside of Vince Dunn, it was interesting. People want to know who's the best defensive scorer on the Seattle Kraken. I've talked about Justin Schultz a lot on Locked On Kraken. I liked bringing in Justin Schultz. I liked his contributions. Remember when we were in the offseason, I talked a lot about Justin Schultz because he was on a little bit of a streak there. And one of our key contributors to really get us activated in the Colorado series. So I'm pretty high on Justin Schultz. But without giving away the whole mailbag, and there you go, Justin Schultz right there. Without giving away the whole mailbag, I do think it was interesting that Jeff Baker talked specifically about not just Schultz on the power play, but he talked about that he has an expiring deal and how that might impact the minutes that he sees this season. I say minutes, that's a little bit more of a basketball term, but I mean, yeah, his time on ice. But I'm curious to see how that plays out. I get what Jeff is saying. We do need to get some of our younger talent more time, but there's a balancing act about being effective and efficient in how we do that versus making sure that we are putting ourselves in the best position possible to win games. So that's defensive pairings, line combinations, all of those things. So even though Jeff, and again, you'll have to read the whole article, check out the Seattle Times link in the show notes. He alluded to maybe feeling a little put on the spot, especially about who's going to be our highest scoring defensive player. But again, this goes to, we've talked about Erik Karlsson. We've talked about some other free agents. We've talked about a lot of different things. And again, I broke down the roster, and we're going to continue doing this. We have some goals to make up. And I do think Schultz, especially on the defensive side of things, can be a player that helps us make up some of those goals that we're missing. And what do I mean by that? I talked about the goals, just the raw numbers of goals scored by players that are no longer on the roster. Ryan Donato, near and dear to my heart. Morgan Geekie. We've got Daniel Sprong and, of course, Carson Soucy. Now, we don't lose a lot of goals with Carson Soucy, so I do think Schultz can, quote-unquote, make up those goals on the defensive side. But offensively, like for like, given the players that I just named that we no longer have on the roster, and given the players that we've added to the roster, we still have some work to do. But I do think what we're going to see is that other players are going to have more opportunity to step up. So I think it's interesting that Jeff maybe, and I read it as mildly reluctantly said Justin Schultz. I like Schultz. I've been pretty high on Schultz. And again, everydayers, you know that. OGers, you know that. So I think we're going to get another good year from him. But it is an interesting question. Who else on the defensive side is going to help us? And again, we've kind of talked about this. I'm a little bit concerned, but that's been a concern that I've had. I've mostly talked about defensive defensemen, but now, when you see what other defensemen across the league can do, is that a concern for the Seattle Kraken? Nah, I think only time will tell. A lot of people also very curious where Riker Evans will fall into the pecking order. Before we move on to the games that you absolutely have to circle in January, this will kind of lead us into that. But Jeff was asked about the Seattle Metropolitans callback. And Jeff says he's all about it. Like we talked about on our last episode of Locked On Kraken, you've got 2 teams that are the youngest of the 32 in the NHL. The Winter Classic is all about throwing it back, right? Back to history. There is not Seattle Kraken NHL history in Seattle, but there is Seattle hockey history at the NHL level, including a Stanley Cup championship team history in Seattle. And so Jeff likes that. But then he goes on this, I read it in my mind as an epic rant. And, I've been able to work alongside Jeff at different events and games for the Seattle Kraken. So I could almost hear his voice as he was writing this. And he says he has zero issue with the logo, if it is indeed the logo. But what he does have issue with, and I thought this was so interesting, it's not really something that I've thought of, but probably because I don't have a team where this has necessarily happened. But he gives a lot of different examples of teams that were in one city and now they've been brought back, or the lineage has been extended to another city, and now that new city is using their logos. What's an example? The Carolina Hurricanes using a Connecticut, or a Hartford, very specifically, Whalers kind of mock-up. He has issue with that. Or a big one, I'm sure, for Seattle fans, the Oklahoma City Thunder perhaps using a Seattle Supersonics logo. He is not for that. He says something akin to, once he left a city, leave it alone. What's funny is, of course, I cover the Seattle Kraken and now I live in Oklahoma. So I personally would kind of like it, but I'm not saying I disagree with Jeff. I think, again, I just haven't thought about it. It hasn't happened. How would I feel if the New York Metropolitans ceased to exist in New York or relocated to, let's say anywhere but Seattle or Oklahoma or even North Carolina, because I have a soft place in my heart for North Carolina. So if they move to, I don't know, Idaho, would I want to see that logo for the Idaho Metropolitans or like the Idaho Spuds? I don't know. It's interesting. It's not ever happened for me, to me, about a team that I root for. The closest would be in women's hockey. The Riveters started as the New York Riveters. And then they were the New York Riveters that played in New Jersey. And then they became the Metropolitan Riveters. Now, obviously, I have no issue with Metropolitans. I am a Mets fan. I am a Seattle Metropolitans fan by way of the Kraken show. But I'm not here for naming your team after a city that it doesn't play in. So is that related? Maybe. I don't know. I'm not mad at Jeff's take there at all. I'm not mad at his take at all. I just haven't, in the way and in the context the question was asked, I really haven't thought about it. There was another question here. And again, you're going to have to read Jeff's article, but talking about players that, could make an impact. And once again, you kind of see Eeli Tolvanen's name, specifically about extensions. And I've talked about this. I think Eeli Tolvanen can be a piece that we want to keep for Seattle. But I do think that means that Tolvanen is going to have to be one of those players that helps bridge that gap, right? In the goals that we need, the goals that we lost versus the goals that we need. And I do think Tolvanen can do that. So the question was asked outside of Matty Beniers and his pending contract, which, yes, Ron Francis has talked about in some of his offseason media availability, who's the next critical signing? Could it be Eeli Tolvanen? Maybe. At least that's what Jeff thinks. So question of the day, outside of Matty Beniers, who's the next player that we have to sign for the long term? Thinking of the roster right now. Eeli Tolvanen's definitely top three for me. I want to think more on this. We might talk about this later in the week. I think it's a great question. And again, I've started looking at Cap Friendly. We talked about who's a UFA and RFA coming up, and I've mentioned Eeli Tolvanen. I do think, again, for me, he's top three. I just don't know that I have an answer right now, because I do think some of it is contingent on this season and what we see from the Kraken overall, but we do need individuals to step up. So again, check out that article by Jeff Baker over at the Seattle Times, his most recent mailbag. And you can find that link if you are listening on audio. Hello, thank you so much for being an everydayer and making us a part of your daily routine or your daily digest, however you want to say it. But also, hello to my YouTubers. As you can see, my setup's a little bit different, as I mentioned earlier on the show, I am visiting family in New York, back home in my original home. Flew right over the Metropolitan Stadium, Citi Fields, as I got off the plane. That's always a fun little treat, and I get to see Citi Field flying in. Anyway, question of the day: who do you think we need to sign for the long term, other than Matty Beniers? Coming up next on Locked On Kraken, you got Jeff's take on this show about the leaked Winter Classic logo. I talked about it last week, the Winter Classic logo. But other than the Winter Classic, what are some games that I have circled on my calendar in January? And yes, I mentioned Erik Karlsson briefly in this episode, but you best believe his new team is one of the teams that I have circled. That's coming up on this episode of Locked On Kraken. All right, we are coming down the stretch. We just finished the second stanza of this episode, visited Jeff Baker in his mailbag once again. I got to do a mailbag. I've always kind of been a little wishy-washy about mailbag. Also, I don't know, the term is a little weird for me. I'm just very particular like that. I'm a little crotchety when it comes to that. But I enjoy it, so we're going to have to do it. We're going to have to find one. I want to get out to Seattle, though. I think getting a mailbag when I'm in the thick of it, being able to give you real-time responses and insight from people that I'm talking to, I think is what I'm leaning towards. So let's just wait till next month. We're almost there, folks. Woo! I cannot wait for this training camp. I've said time and time again, this is going to be and has to be the most competitive training camp that we have ever seen in Seattle Kraken franchise history. But before we do that, again, the Winter Classic, baby, coming up 2024 T-Mobile Park. That's right, in Seattle, Washington. We will be hosting none other than those fun reigning champions, the Vegas Golden Knights. The Vegas Golden Knights, who've become a little bit of my personal rival. But speaking of the January schedule, who do we see January 1 for the Winter Classic? It's the Vegas Golden Knights, so you best believe I've got that circled on my calendar. It's a lot of away games. As you can see, we've got 2 at home in that first week, and then we've got 6 on the road, including the Pittsburgh Penguins. And I'm not going to get into the whole trade situation, at least not on today's episode. But Erik Karlsson, after a three-team trade, is going to the Pittsburgh Penguins. That is a game that I have circled. The Pittsburgh Penguins were not the Pittsburgh Penguins of yesteryear, or at least during the early to mid years of the Sidney Crosby era. So I'm curious to see what this team is. I believe our friends over at Locked On Devils asked, with Karlsson going over there, where does this put the Penguins as a contender? They've got a lot of players that know how to do the hockey. And Erik Karlsson, we know that he wanted to go to a contender. So does that bear any weight? What was it about Pittsburgh that made that the right choice, other than they were willing to figure out the trade? Karlsson definitely would have helped us come up with some of those goals. But the question becomes, I don't want a defenseman who, even though he can be an offensive powerhouse, is going to be a defensive liability. Is Karlsson a liability? I think people have mixed opinions, quite honestly. I have not zeroed in on his game enough to know. I'm an eye test person. A lot of you know that. So I haven't zeroed in on his game enough to have an opinion on that. But I will be watching on the 15th. And then other games, I'm always going to say Chicago because that's where Ryan Donato is. I'm always going to say Chicago. I talked about William Nylander a little bit, and would he be a good player to trade for? Some people thought that trading away Shane Wright to get Nylander might be the move. I did not like Wright being a part of the package. I do think it's an interesting exercise to have Nylander. So he's another player I'm going to keep an eye on. And then our first ever captain, I believe, is still on the Toronto Maple Leafs. So that's the 15th at Pittsburgh. The 21st, the Maple Leafs roll into town at Climate Pledge Arena. The 24th, once again, we see Chicago. And then we close out the month with St. Louis and Columbus Blue Jackets at home. And then the San Jose Sharks, aka Defenses for Nerds team, on the 30th. So yeah, the big game, obviously, the Winter Classic in January. I'm very curious to see how we fare against a new looking, not younger, but newer looking Pittsburgh team. And yes, I always want to see Ryan Donato. That is basically our show for today. Again, we are on an off-season schedule. I'm almost always going to have a show on Tuesday. Sometimes it will vary if we go Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. But I will be honest, it's probably going to be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday this week because I'm on the road and have some basketball assignments that I have to complete. But as always, thank you for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. I mentioned it earlier, but if you've got the time and you want to hear some good analysis outside of just the Kraken, maybe even focus specifically on the Western Conference, head over to Locked On NHL, and I will have the Women's Hockey Spotlight segment on the Friday episode of Locked On NHL. Until then, hold fast, stay true, support Nadia if you can, but also remember, even if you don't want to support that initiative, no judgment whatsoever, still find time to be kind to yourself. At minimum, be kind to yourself. Do something good for your health and wellness. And once you've taken care of shop, be mindful and kind of others as well. I'll say it again, just for good measure. Hold fast, stay true, and I'll catch you on the next episode of Locked On Kraken. Peace out, everybody. Have a great day.